Greetings. Welcome to this discussion on how to build a budget. My name is Pete Radowski. And before we begin talking about building a budget, I would like to share with you just a few facts about who I am. I was a parish pastor for 33 and a half years. My first call was to a pastoral-sized congregation. We worshiped about 120 in the winter and about 80 in the summer. Then I was called to a suburban congregation just outside of Cincinnati, Kenwood, Ohio. And I served here for 28 years. And then for the last 18 years, I have been doing consulting for the church. I've consulted with congregations from New Hampshire to Minnesota. I have shared what I know and what I've learned about parish administration, about visioning, about planning, about stewardship. And part of stewardship is, how do you build a budget? I was very glad to be asked to share what I've learned over those 52 years of ministry with you today. We're going to begin our discussion by talking about what is the purpose of a budget. There are two types of budget, and each has a distinct purpose. There is a line item budget. And I'm sure you all know about line item budgets. Line item budget is just over my right shoulder. And in that budget, we have 4 items: worship, Sunday school, Bible study, and retreats. And then next to each one of those 4 ministries, we have the finances that are allocated to support those ministries. So worship is going to be X number of dollars, and so is Sunday school and Bible study and retreats. And then in the bottom, we have a grand total of what all of those costs. Now, the purpose of a line item budget is to be a working document. And it is a working document for the Finance Committee. The Finance Committee receives from the Church Council the goals for the coming year, ministry priorities. The Finance Committee also receives from various committees and work task forces within the church about what they want to do and what they suspect that will cost. Then the Finance Committee sits down and takes the information it receives from the Church Council and what it receives from committees and task forces and puts together a line item budget. So the congregation knows what it's going to spend in the coming year to support its ministries. A line item budget is for treasurer. And as a treasurer has a line item budget, as the treasurer is paying the bills of the congregation, a line item budget makes it very easy for the treasurer to note that in one area we seem to be underspending the budget, not just by a little bit, but by a great amount, and in another area we're overspending the budget, again, not just a little, but by a great amount. And when the treasurer notices the difference, the treasurer can go to the pastor or to the church council or to the finance committee and begin to ask the question, do we have a problem? Line item budgets are also for auditors. Every congregation should have an audit once a year. Someone to come and to make sure that what has been claimed to be paid was actually paid, and there are checks or transfers of money to show it. Now, the real issue here is transparency. I suspect very, very few treasurers do illegal things, embezzle money. But if you have an audit and the audit says everything is on the up and up, trust is justified. It is a reason to be there. Nobody raises a question. So a line item budget has a purpose for the Finance Committee, a purpose for the Treasurer, a purpose in the audit of the expenditures for a year. I want to say this is an extremely important document for these three groups of leaders. And this presentation will not in any way, shape, or form say we have to get rid of a line item budget. But having said all of these positive things, line item budgets have a problem. The problem is that they do not connect or inspire general congregational members. It was once said that the most read document in a congregation was its budget. But I don't believe that's exactly true. What I believe happened was whenever you had a congregational meeting, the only item to be discussed, really discussed or debated, was a line item in the budget. So the conclusion was drawn, this is the most read document within a congregation. In fact of the matter is most people didn't read it. It was enough to have the budget in front of them so that they would know that people, leaders, knew where they were going. But as the picture shows here, line item budgets put people to sleep. They ignore them. The important issue is only that they exist. Now, having said this, there's a second type of budget, and that budget is a narrative budget. And a narrative budget has a totally different purpose than the line item budget. The narrative budget transforms a line item budget into a story. We begin with a line item budget, and then it is transformed into a document that people want to read, that people will actually pick up and go through and say, oh, so this is what we are doing. So this is how we're spending our money. Here I want to participate in the ministries of my church. Here I want to contribute my financial resources to help my church accomplish these things. Therefore, the narrative budget is different than the line item budget. Now there's a third purpose for budgets. And that third purpose is that they are reality checks. There is an old saying, show me your checkbook. For this presentation, I'm going to change it to show me your budget. And I will show you what's important to you. For example, when I did consultations, I would ask the church that I was with and their leaders, so what describes your church? What differentiates your church? What do you do extremely well? And sometimes I would get the answer, our youth ministry. Our youth ministry is absolutely superb. It is just absolutely fabulous. You can't tell you how much we are proud of our youth ministry. Then I asked to see the budget. And as I'm looking through the budget, I'm looking for youth ministry. And when I find the category youth ministry, if the line item items in youth ministry are $200 out of a $120,000 budget, or maybe $300 out of a $120,000 budget, I begin to wonder, does this congregation really value youth ministry? Or on the other hand, if I pick up the budget and under youth ministry there's a $5,000 or $10,000 line item with several other line items underneath youth ministry, I think, well, they're being honest. what they say they're doing and what they say they're proud of shows up in the budget. I believe them. Now I want to turn to how do we build a budget. And I'm going to begin by saying there are common elements to every budget. And these elements should be there if they're not there. And I'm sure there are more, but I have picked 3. And the first common element is the budget mirrors a congregation's purpose. Every congregation needs a purpose. A purpose is the glue that holds the congregation together. It is a magnet which attracts all members to participate and to achieve a common purpose. If a purpose doesn't exist in a congregation, or if it is not known, everything in the budget, everything the congregation does is random. But when everything is attracted to the purpose, a congregation is united. Therefore, purpose is seen in through the budget. The second component of a budget is defining financial support for each ministry in the ministry portfolio. We began with a very short line item budget. Here is worship and an X number of dollars, and here is Sunday school and an X number of dollars, and here is Bible study and an X number of dollars, and retreat and X number of dollars. The budget defines the support very clearly, very plainly in actual numbers. And then salaries and building expenses are included in the ministry portion of the budget. There is no separate item called salaries, and there is no separate item called building expenses. Everything in these 2 areas are somehow fit into the ministries of the congregation. So let's look at what I just said. Mirroring a budget, mirroring a congregation's purpose, the budget must do this. And so here on the screen behind me, we have a line item budget, and then immediately under the line item budget, we have our purpose is to be and to make disciples of Jesus. Now, I chose this purpose because in my 18 years of consulting, actually I did it longer than that, I did it before I retired, congregations continually had this purpose, or something extremely similar. Our purpose is to be and to make disciples of Jesus. Now, everything below that is to say, this is how we are, and this is how we make disciples. Now we can go one step further, and instead of just putting it on the top of the budget, right underneath it, to say, this is what we're trying to achieve with the allocation of our funds, we carry it down into all those areas, and we say, we are disciples, and we make disciples for Jesus through our worship, through our praise of God, through our hearing of the Word, through our receiving of the sacraments. Or we are and we make disciples for Jesus in our Sunday school, where we study the Scriptures, where we debate particular passages, when we connect particular passages to the major teachings of our church. We strengthen our disciples in the congregation, and we can invite neighbors and friends to join in those studies and discussion. We are and we make disciples in our Bible studies, be those Bible studies during the week at the church building, or those Bible studies are in the homes of members who invite their friends and their neighbors to come for an hour or two once a week to read a particular text, to study the Bible, and to pray together. And we can certainly say we are and we make disciples on retreats when we spend extended time not only in studying but also in fellowship. Now see how that purpose glues together and makes all work for being and making disciples in each line item when we highlight it. And that means we really believe our purpose. Ministry areas receive financial support. Now, I'm a big fan of making ministry areas, and I see the real advantage is to bring ministries to different generations together in ministry areas. So I've created 3 ministry areas for the congregation that I've created in my head for this discussion. And the first is faith formation. The second is care of members. The third is outreach. And all of these serve as umbrellas to the ministries of the congregation. Now, I chose 3 areas because that seems to be the areas that in all my consulting seem to be common to every church. You can add a 4th or a 5th, depending upon how your church functions and how you do your ministry. But let's look how a budget looks when we're in under these umbrellas of ministry areas. And here again, I'm using a line item budget. So we have faith formation at X number of dollars. And under faith formation, I am going to put what we've talked about already. I'm going to put worship and Sunday school and Bible studies and retreats. Your church may add 3 or 4 or 5 other items here, and then under worship there may be 3 or 4 or 5 lines talking about communion wafers and bulletins and whatever. And under care of members, I'm going to put pastoral acts, weddings, funerals, counseling. I'm going to put in here social groups, fellowship groups, because care of members is partly a social issue. We are in a community, and we need to know each other. Care of members may be support groups, strictly for our own members, or prayer circles, or whatever. And then under outreach, I'm going to put in here mission support to the Synodical Church, mission support for the National Church. I'm going to put in money here for local partnerships, Interfaith Hospitality Network, maybe a local food bank, or anybody else that we serve by reaching beyond the walls of a congregation. And then I'm going to add all of those up, and I'm going to have the total for our budget. Now, I said before, salaries and building expenses belong in one of those 3 ministry areas. Because when we put salaries and building expenses in those ministry areas, we reveal the real cost of what it costs to have worship and what it costs to have Sunday schools and so on and so forth. But I'm going to do that for another reason as well. When we include salaries and building expenses into the umbrellas of ministry areas, we challenge a modern criticism of the church. And the modern criticism of the church by those who are antagonistic towards the church, or those who are just benign towards the church, that $4 out of $5 that the church receives is spent on itself. Only 20%, $1 out of $5, is spent on actual ministry. And so I want to take a look at how putting salaries and building expenses into the line items of the budget changes the whole perception and challenges this particular criticism of the church. So for this presentation, I created a $120,000 budget. And I chose that number because in my consulting, this seems to be where the vast majority of churches are in the expenditures they have and the money they receive. If you're a larger church, it's going to be larger. If you are a smaller church, it may be slightly smaller. Now, and then I divided the $120,000 this way. I put 60% of it into faith formation because of the 4 areas that are before you. And I put 30% into care of members, and then I put 10% into outreach. Then I took the building expenses and I divided the building expenses in half, and I put half of the building expenses into faith formation and half into care of members. And I did not include building expenses into outreach, but we'll talk about we may want to put a little bit of money in that area as well. So here's a $120,000 budget. 60% of it is in this formation. If I do not include salaries and budget, I'm going to spend $5,400 on worship. But if I include the pastor's salary, the time the pastor spends in preparing a sermon, the time the pastor spends working with the organist, choosing hymns and music, if I put in there the secretary's time of putting together a bulletin or handouts, if I put in there the time of a custodian, I'm going to spend $54,000 on worship. Now, which church would you like to belong to? The one that spends $5,400 on worship, or the church that spends $54,000 on worship? If I go and have salaries and building expenses separate, I'm going to spend $2,700 on Sunday school. But with salaries, time to prepare for Sunday school classes, time to put together a whole bunch of materials and everything else, I'm going to spend $27,000. If I do Bible study, I'm going to spend $800 if I don't include the prep time and the providing of room for the Bible study to occur. But I'll spend $8,000 if I include salaries and building. In the area of retreats, I did $100 versus $1,000. Now look what happens. If I have salaries and building as 1 or 2 separate islands, I'm going to spend $81,000 in this area. Any outsider looking at this says, aha, you see, you spend $4 out of $5 on yourself. But if I include those in ministry areas, I can come back and say, these are our ministries to ourselves and to the outside community. And we are active in inviting the outside community to come in here. We spend the money that we receive and allocate it only in ministry areas. Now I want to change the subject. And I want to go to transforming a line item budget into a narrative budget. Remember, I said at the very beginning, one of the problems with line item budgets is they do not connect and they do not inspire the average congregational member. Narrative budgets are designed to inspire and to connect the average congregational member. Narrative budgets come in different mediums. I chose 3. There are obviously many, many more. And the 3 I chose were the annual report, the brochures, and YouTube. We are going to look at these 3 mediums and how to begin the process of transforming a line item budget into a narrative budget. In an annual report, usually there is a line item budget, the column on the left. And we've seen this before: faith formation, worship, Sunday school, Bible study, retreats. Here is the numbers amount, and the total is $90,000. But if you divide the page into 1/3, 2/3, if you divide the page a half and a half, you can put what I call annotated notes. And the annotated notes are like this. This year our budget is $54,000 for worship. We really want to do something special for Reformation Sunday. And while we've always done something special for Easter, we want to go over the top this year for Easter. So we raised the budget allocation for worship from $52,000 to $54,000. Now look at what you've just done. You have projected the future. You have told people what you're going to do. You are preparing the way for someone to say, I really want to participate in Reformation, or I really want to do something for Easter. And you're beginning to build momentum. You can do the same thing for Bible study. We want to take our Bible study and we want to add to it a digital component. Our kids are all over digital components and technology. And what we want to do is bring our Bible study into their world where they will participate. Now that's just a little note. You don't put this in for every line item, but look at how you are creating a story. And then you go down through how you take care of members, and then how you do outreach in the same way with 1 or 2 line items. But you see, you're beginning to add to that line item budget to make it attractive. Or we might take the annual budget and do it this way, by adding pictures to the report with the line item budget. When I was at Good Shepherd, our annual report had at the very top of it, this is our budget, this is what we did last year, our accomplishments, and this is what we're going to do this year. I pushed the staff very strongly to make what we accomplished about 25, maybe 30% of the annual report. And at least 50, if not more, I know the math doesn't add up, but 50 or more has to be on what we're planning to do in the coming year. And we began to notice people were reading because they already knew what we accomplished. It was good to remind them, but they didn't know what we were planning for the coming year. And then we added pictures. Pictures of the staff, pictures of leaders, pictures of people doing things, pictures of us worshiping, pictures of confirmation retreats, pictures throughout the whole written report. And suddenly, we had a document that people wanted to read. Occasionally we would put pictures next to the line items, especially if we had worship and then 6 or 7 or 8 line items underneath it. But you see, the budget was always on the page where we were describing accomplishments and future for a particular ministry umbrella. I have always been a fan of pie charts. So we can add this to the annual budget. I've said all along, 60% of our budget is for faith formation. The blue area there is for care of members. And the green area, or the lighter green area, is for outreach. Now, I said before outreach was 10%. I chose that number because I looked up the 200 congregations in the Southern Ohio Synod of the ELCA. And the vast majority of them had outreach at 10%. Well, slightly above. About 4.8% went for mission support. And about 5.2%, 5.3% went to outreach in local communities. I wish the number was 15%. And if I was going to write an ideal budget, I would push to raise it because I think we need to be more active outside of our doors. But here is a graphic which explains really what's important to us and how we're spending the financial resources we have as a congregation. There are brochures. Brochures have lots of pictures and a lot less words. In an annual report, you can get away with paragraphs. You can't put long paragraphs, maybe a paragraph of 3 or 4 or 5 sentences in a brochure. In a brochure, you only have totals for ministry areas. Unless you really want to highlight a particular area, like under faith formation, you might want to put the total for worship, but you certainly don't want to put all the other line items in there. And so the information is limited, but complete. Now look at this brochure. Remember, the purpose is to attract, to connect, to inspire. And so it's multicolor. It's green and purple and dark blue and orange and some kind of tan yellow in there. You see the pictures? This is a way to catch people's eye and to make them look down, and then at the bottom of each one of these areas you can have a total. So we're going to spend $90,000 on faith formation. We're going to spend $36,000 on care of members, and we're going to spend $12,000 on outreach. It's a very effective way to do it. And then we have YouTube. And YouTube has words, visuals, pictures, graphs, and it can take action movies of people worshiping and people taking food to a food bank or whatever else. Now let me share with you a communication theory. There's a communication theory that says 1/3 of adults process information through words. That's a line item budget. That's an annual report without pictures. 1/3 of human beings process information through pictures and graphs. So when we added pictures and graphs to the annual report and put the budget underneath each umbrella, we basically increased the potential audience by 100%. We went from 1/3 to 2/3. And then when we add here YouTube, especially if we have very short video clips of people moving, we get actions. And now we have the potential of having 100% of the members of the congregation wanting to read about or see or experience the budget. Now, frankly, we're never going to hit 100%. But through a 5 or 10 minute video, we can reach a lot more than we can with either a brochure or an annual report or an annotated budget. Now, the other advantage of YouTube is we know that people give to budgets because of loyalty to leaders. So in a YouTube, in a 5 or 10 minute, no more than 10 minute video YouTube, we can have a member talking in church about, I need my church, my faith needs my church, I'm going to support the faith formation part of the budget because of its worship experiences and how I'm lifted up every Sunday morning. And then you can show some very nice pictures of people doing things. Then you can have another person come in, a valued leader, and say, let me tell you how the church cares for its members. When my spouse was really sick, this is how my church responded. So I'm going to support this budget. And then you can have a third person come in and say, the reason I'm here is because of what you're doing in the community, what we are doing in the community. YouTubes are a wonderful way to do this. And remember, you're watching a YouTube now. Now, narrative budgets have several purposes. One, they can be part of the stewardship campaign. The primary job of the stewardship campaign is to tell the story of a congregation so members want to connect and participate in its ministries. Narrative budgets, especially in brochure forms, can be handed out on Sunday morning, stuffed into bulletins, distributed in other ways, put in a tract rack for people to pick up. They can be mailed to every member of the congregation. And narrative budgets can be emailed to every member of the congregation. Another communication theory is, when I was ordained some 50 years ago, it was said by experts in communication, if you want somebody to know something in the church, you have to tell them 5 different ways and 5 different communications mediums. The number today by the experts is 7. So between 5 and 7 different mediums of communication if you want people to look at the budget. Here we have 3 or 4. Stewardship campaigns, handouts, mails, slow mail, and email. All of them should be a part of our budget, especially our thinking through a narrative budget. A word about authorship. Both line item and narrative budgets are important, but they need a different author. Line item budgets are prepared by financial people. They just love numbers. My daughter is a CPA. She can just look at figures upon figures going down columns, make sense, and can get excited when she finds something. She's the one to write the line item budget. Narrative budgets are prepared by storyteller, graphic designers, artsy people. If we would ask graphic designer, artsy people to write a line item budget, there would be tremendous rebellion. If we ask the financial people to prepare a narrative budget, they'd look at you like you're crazy and they would not be very happy. Now remember, narrative budgets are for storytelling. Line item budgets are working documents for leaders. Now I want to conclude our discussion with a summary. I was privileged to serve on a planning committee for a nationwide stewardship conference sponsored and designed and put on by the Presbyterian Church. I went to their conference because I was a part of the leadership team in 2019. And at that conference, there was a video, a 5-minute video on narrative budgets by Robert Hayes. It was a superb video. I sat there and said, he said everything that I've said for this whole time in 5 minutes. And so I asked him if I could use this video as a summary for our time together. And so watch this video, and it says the same things that have been said all along, but in a different voice. Here's the video.
One of the main reasons that people give to an organization is because they believe in the mission of the organization. Successful nonprofits are really good at telling their story and showing how they are accomplishing their mission. In the church, we are often not very good at this. We typically send out a line item budget once a year and then ask people to pledge to it for the next year. A line item budget doesn't tell your story. It doesn't show how your church is accomplishing its mission. Most church members don't even look at the line item budget, and the ones who do look at it for all the wrong reasons. Why is the pastor's cell phone bill so high? Doesn't the pastor know that Verizon is running a friends and family deal right now? And if the pastor will just go change his cell phone plan, then we can balance the budget and save stewardship. Sound familiar? Now you need a line item budget. Your finance committee, your session, and your church staff need it. It is an important tool for managing the business of the church. However, your line item budget is not a storytelling tool. It is not something that should be used to either encourage or threaten your church members into giving. Instead, you should consider using a narrative or missional budget. A narrative budget is a storytelling tool. A narrative budget shows how your church is doing mission and ministry and what it costs to provide that mission and ministry. A narrative budget tells the story of how your church is being the hands and feet of Christ in your community and in the world. So how do you make a narrative budget? The first step is to identify the mission and ministry areas of your church. Ideally, you'll be able to connect your ministry areas back to your mission statement. The goal is to identify the areas of ministry that your church focuses on. For example, worship, Christian education, outreach to the community, fellowship, mission, and pastoral care. Once you have identified your ministry areas, the next step is to allocate every line item in your budget or every expense that your church has to one of the ministry areas. You will have to make some assumptions about some expenses, and you should document those assumptions. For example, about what percentage of your pastor's time is spent on worship and worship planning versus pastoral care. Some of the line items will be easier to allocate, like the expenses associated with your organist. Those can be allocated 100% to worship. Your building expenses will be a little more difficult. Think about what percentage of the time the building is used for worship, Christian education, ministry to the community, the preschool, and so on. Now, this is more of an art than a science, but the goal is to have your entire line item budget allocated to ministry areas. Personnel in building and administration are not ministry areas. They are functional expenses of ministry areas. Every line item under personnel and building and administration should be allocated to ministry areas. Once you have allocated every line item expense to a ministry area, you should have a total cost for each area. Your next step is to write a narrative summary about each ministry area. Celebrate in written form what your church does in each area. Talk about how your church does worship or how your church does outreach to the community and the impact it has. Take this opportunity to celebrate how you are being the hands and feet of Christ. And remember, this is a storytelling tool, but this story should not be a novel. Short and sweet will have a much bigger impact on people. Finally, take your ministry areas, the narrative you have written about each area, and the total cost of each area, and put them together in a brochure format. Visual images are one of the best storytelling tools we have, so make sure you include lots of pictures. If you hand people a document with no pictures, most people will read the first 2 sentences and the last sentence and then put it down. But if you hand people a brochure with lots of pictures, most people will read every word and spend time looking at every picture. The finishing touches to the document are important as well. You can use a simple trifold format and print it in-house, or you can have a multi-page booklet on high-gloss paper that you send to a professional print company. Do what fits your context and church, but don't make it look cheap. This should be a brochure, available in print and online, that catches people's eyes and inspires and energizes people about your church. A well-crafted narrative budget is a wonderful tool for celebrating the mission and ministries of your church and for connecting those ministries to the dollars you ask people to tithe to the church. We have examples of narrative budgets on our website, and your regional ministry relations officer would be happy to help you and your congregation with creating a narrative budget for your own church.
Welcome back. Thank you for participating in this discussion on how to build a budget. I hope it has been helpful. I pray that it made your imaginations begin to run while we were sharing information and saying, we can do that, we can do that. Maybe sometimes saying, not here. And I want to encourage you to really look at, as we go into the year, how are we going to design our line item budget, especially under umbrellas of ministry areas, and who are we going to ask to design, once we have the line item budget, a narrative budget to engage and to inspire our members. Thank you for being here.